All right, so this is the final chapter for the prologues that lead into the main event. Now, let me just say right now, I am truly hyped up because this event is one heck of an event, but it also had changed up the entire lineup for Marvel Comics in the late 1990s. Well, not the entire lineup, but you did have a few characters be affected by this one singular event, where of course it gave birth to another event that we're going to cover later on the channel. Now, with all that being said, this is the final chapter for the prologues. It's the X-Men finding out who Onslaught is. It's the X-Men realizing they're going to need all hands on deck if they believe they have the ability to stop Onslaught. Now, the opening pages of this storyline is really important for two different reasons, because as we jump 45 minutes into the future, the first reason why I say the opening pages of this storyline is really important because it's Jean Grey right now trying to leave a message behind for basically the other X teams out there. Because in the 1990s, you had so many different X teams. You had X Factor, X Force, Excalibur, Generation X. You had all these different X teams in the 1990s. But for Jean Grey, she's saying if you are receiving this message, the X-Men are officially gone. We have been killed off by one of our own. And of course, she's saying it's Charles Xavier because Charles Xavier is Onslaught. But things get even crazier. Here's the reason why. Because this is also what Bishop saw in his far future. You see, for Bishop, he found a message that was left behind by Jean Grey. When he played that message, it was this. It was basically Bishop finding out the reason why the X-Men are no longer around in his future because somebody on the X-Men had betrayed the others. And so now it's kind of like, okay, is Charles Xavier that traitor? Because for a good while, we were kind of left to believe it was Gambit because Gambit was the last surviving member of the X-Men in Bishop's future. But now we have to transition over to the present day. Now, when we do, we're picking up with Charles Xavier right now, just in his study. Now, for Charles Xavier, we're also seeing him looking at an old picture of him and Magneto. And it's him kind of remembering that in the past, those two guys had plans to change the world. But unfortunately, the world has changed them. Now, at the end of our last video, we had saw Charles Xavier call the X-Men back to him. Now, for the X-Men, they were trying their best to hunt down the Juggernaut because he was on school grounds. Now, for Jean Grey, she took him away somewhere safe to look into his mind to hopefully figure out, like, who is Onslaught, because Juggernaut knew. Now, once she had learned the true secret behind the idea of who Onslaught was, Juggernaut was taken away by Charles Xavier. And we were kind of left to wonder what in the world did he do to Juggernaut. But either way, for the X-Men, they heard the call. They're kind of like, wait, you're telling us to no longer find Juggernaut and come back to you? Why? Now, once you have all the X-Men arrive back to Xavier's study, you also have Jean Grey arrive as well. Now, Jean Grey has not warned the rest of the X-Men about what's going on with Charles Xavier, what she had discovered about Charles Xavier. Now, for the rest of the X-Men, they're now hearing Charles' speech. And this is Charles basically saying, like, you know what, guys? I'm tired. I'm tired of all the mess happening across the world towards the mutant race. I think and I believe it's time for us to go ahead and just take action to force change into this world. Now, the way Charles is talking for the X-Men, they're kind of like, hold up, what in the world is going on with Charles Xavier? Like, the way he's talking, he does seem a tad bit off. Now, for Jean Grey, it's really more of her just trying to figure out what to do here. Like, for example, it's her right now trying to probe the mind of Charles Xavier, hoping to find some kind of weakness to strike at to hopefully bring him down. She's even wondering, like, okay, What if the X-Men are able to attack him right now before you have Charles or Onslaught reveal his hand? Now, for Jean Grey, when she looks over at the desk of Charles Xavier, she sees the gem of Sidorak. Now, that gem is very important because it gave King Marco his ability to be the Juggernaut. But she realized if Charles has that, then most likely King Marco is no longer around. But on top of that, she also realized that possibly Kane is trapped inside the actual gem. Now, for Jean Grey, she wants to warn the rest of the X-Men about what she had discovered. But this really shows how powerful Onslaught truly is, because when it comes to Jean Grey, she wants to tell Cyclops, like, hey, we have to act now. But she's too late. And that is when you have Jean Grey see all this psychic energy around everybody. Only she and Charles Xavier can see it. And then you have Charles basically stop her from allowing her to tell the X-Men what is truly going on. Now, the X-Men kind of like, what in the world is going on with Jean Grey? Like, what in the world is happening to her? While the rest of the X-Men rush over to her, you have Cannonball continue to look at Charles Xavier and realize that he has completely changed, that now he's wearing the armor of Onslaught. Now, for Jean Grey, she still truly believes that Onslaught is Charles Xavier, but this is Onslaught saying, like, that's not the case, and let him explain. He says, he created me, talking about Charles Xavier. In his own way, he created me to do what he alone could not. I was forged within the crucibles of his fear, his frustration, his rage at the injustice against his people, all those darkest desire for revenge, for control, for power, all those dark emotions in the mind of Charles Xavier helped create me in his mind. And so we're kind of left to believe our Charles Xavier is currently locked away in his own mind, thanks to Onslaught taking over his mind, taking over his body. Now, for the X-Men, they're kind of like, okay, what to do here? Now, for Onslaught, he believes that even though he said he's not technically Charles Xavier, he still kind of is Charles Xavier. He's kind of hoping the X-Men will follow. Now, for the X-Men, they're kind of like, okay, you're asking us to follow, but what if we don't follow you? And so he begins to attack their minds. Now, luckily for the X-Men, you have Cyclops step up. Because you have Cyclops go ahead and just blast Onslaught with his optic beam. Now, with him doing that, it's kind of like, okay, cool. The X-Men have some kind of hope that they believe they have the ability to actually stop Onslaught here. But here's the thing, because you have Onslaught show how powerful he truly is. He begins to play mind games with them. He begins to use his ability to the point where the X-Men are no longer able to use their own ability against him. Now, while he is leaving, he also says one other thing. He says, I am just as Charles Xavier as I am somebody else, kind of hinting at the idea that there are two people who are technically at fault for this creation of this being. Now, thankfully for Gambit, he does use his powers as a way to blast a hole in the ground to send the X-Men flying. When he does that, it does free the X-Men from Onslaught control. Now, for Jean Grey, she says Gambit should not be able to do that at all. And the reason why, because how powerful Onslaught truly is. And so for Jean Grey, she's saying that means he is not yet completely in control of Charles Xavier. But now we have to switch over to the Fantastic Four, because for Franklin Richards, he does play a major role in this storyline, but also another one we're going to cover down the road. Now, for Franklin, it's him right now having a conversation with a boy known as Charlie. Here's the catch. For the rest of the Fantastic Four they're kind of like, okay, it's just Franklin right now talking to his imaginary friend. But in reality, Charlie is Onslaught, who's right now pretending to be a child as a way to connect with Franklin. Because for Charles Xavier, in the earlier parts of our coverage over this event, we saw Charles looking up information on Franklin. Because by this point in Marvel Comics, for Franklin, he was labeled as a mutant. Now, with all that being said, you didn't have Onslaught leave. Now, for the X-Men, they had broken up into two different groups. The first group went into Charles Xavier's Ready Room because for the Ready Room, it was where you had Charles Xavier being able to collect information on allies of the X-Men, but also their enemies as well. Now, here's the thing, because for Bishop and his team right now, they're trying their best to get all the information they can. They also realize that Onslaught was looking up information on Franklin Richards. Now, you didn't have Gambit, and also Bishop kind of realized there's something off with Cannonball. He's kind of expressing his fear about Charles Xavier and also Onslaught. And that tells Bishop and also Gambit and the rest of his team right now, like, okay, hold up right now. Onslaught is messing with Cannonball or possibly pretending to be him. Either way, Onslaught does appear and takes out every single member of the X-Men in that room, just like that. But now we have to transition over to Nate Gray. Now, for Nate Gray, as we all know, he is from the age of Apocalypse reality. He is just Cable from that reality. Now, remember, Cable was supposed to be this powerful mutant to take on the world. The problem was he had received the techno-organic virus. With the virus, Cable has to use most of his powers to keep the virus at bay. And so for Nate Gray, he technically does have a tad bit more freedom. But here's the thing. By this point in Marvel Comics, we had discovered that Nate Gray is dying. And the reason why, his own powers are basically killing him. Now, one of the prologues we had did earlier on was about Nate Gray fighting against Holocaust. At the end of that storyline, you had Nate say, hey, you know what? I need to get some help with my powers. You know what? I'll head over to the Avengers. Now, technically, the Avengers do have tie-ins for this event. Their first one is part of Phase 1. But here's the thing. This book right here did come out before that book did, but also like we're kind of past that point what happens in that book when it comes to the Avengers tie-in. But don't worry, you'll see everything as we get into Phase 1 of this crossover. But it's Nate saying like, I need your help with Charles Xavier. It's Nate realizing what's to come down the road. And this is where I kind of bring up the whole idea of Legion Quest and also Age of Apocalypse. And let me explain, because you have Onslaught say he learned everything about that reality through Bishop. You see, when it came to Legion Quest, you had Legion go back in time to kill off Magneto because he believed if Magneto was not around, then most likely Charles Xavier would have been able to reach his lifelong goal. Mutants and humans living together in harmony. The problem was that when it came to Legion, when he went back in time, he killed off Charles Xavier, not Magneto. And so, of course, it gave birth to a brand new timeline, better known as Age of Apocalypse. Now, for most of the X-Men, they had all disappeared, and they were all replaced with their counterparts in that reality. Bishop didn't have one. Bishop was able to live in that reality. And so once you had everything go back to normal, for Bishop, he somewhat does remember his life in that other reality. And so for Onslaught, when he was Charles Xavier going into the mind of Bishop, he had learned everything about that other reality. And so for Onslaught, he's saying like, I want to make sure I don't end up like Apocalypse. Basically saying, I don't want to fail like him, like he did in that reality. I want to make sure that my game plan actually works. And technically, some of the things I'm doing right now, I learned through you and your life in that other reality. But now we have to jump over to Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, and Beast. Now, you have the four characters trying their best to download information out of Cerebro. Here's the thing, because while they're doing that, you had Iceman watching everyone's body temperature. And so as soon as you had Onslaught enter the room, just like that, Iceman realized he was there. You had Bobby attack him. Now, unfortunately, it didn't do much because you did have Onslaught say like, oh, you know, good job. But hey, I have my own powers. And he forced the X-Men to attack one another. Now, for Dark Beast, sorry, I'll say Beast for right now, he was the only one not affected. Now, the reason why I said Dark Beast, because this right here is not our Hank McCoy. This is Hank McCoy from the Age of Apocalypse reality. He's one of the 4 characters who were able to make it over to the main Marvel Universe. But here's the thing, because he tried his best to hide with the X-Men, while the real Beast is somewhat locked away. Now, for a good while there, you had everyone kind of wondering, like, when would the X-Men realize that was not their Beast? It was someone else pretending to be their Beast. Well, you have Onslaught say the only reason why the X-Men were not able to figure out who you were is because I had blocked their minds from finding out, basically. Now, this is also Dark Beast wanting to join Onslaught's side because he sees how powerful Onslaught truly is. Now, for Onslaught, we learned earlier on in our coverage over this event that he wanted Jean Grey by his side. And the reason why? Because Jean Grey is the template for the power of the Phoenix. He wants that information out of her. Here's the thing, Onslaught is truly not at full power yet. His host, Charles Xavier, is still somewhat fighting against him. And so right now for Onslaught, he's not really able to achieve different things like he wants to achieve. Now for Jean Grey, she also realized that he has to rely on other people. So technically, he's not at full power just yet. He's not that powerful God that he wants the world to believe that he is. But this leads us up to that point where we saw earlier where it was Jean Grey sending out a message to the rest of the X-Men team. And so as we see her trying to pull that off, you have Onslaught find her in this chamber that's underneath the school of Charles Xavier. Now, here's the thing, because it's now Onslaught fighting against Jean Grey. Now, for Jean Grey, she believes the rest of the X-Men are dead because she's unable to pick up on them. But gonna find out the X-Men are not dead at all. And matter of fact, you have Cyclops shoot his optic beam as a way to blast Onslaught away from Jean Grey, his wife. Now, this battle is very short-lived. Like, you do have the X-Men lose to Onslaught very easily, but once the battle is wrapped up, you have Dark Beast wanting to experiment on the X-Men. Now, for Onslaught, he's kind of like, no, we are not going to do any kind of experiments on them. Dark Beast, I need you to understand that when it comes to my plans go far beyond what you see right now with the X-Men. They go over the entire world. Sooner or later, every creature on this planet will understand how powerful I truly am. And you then have Dark Beast and Onslaught disappear. But the very last page of the storyline is us jumping over to this facility. Now, this facility is, of course, a Sentinel facility. Now, everyone working there, they're kind of like, hey, listen, there's no way we'll ever use these robots against the mutant race. They're kind of like nuclear bombs. The world will never see nuclear bombs go off ever again. But you see, while they're saying that, you have one of the Sentinels activate, kind of show that chaos is truly coming very soon for the world of Marvel Comics. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.